here's the planet Earth, or let's say a representation of it that I made for this exhibition. Formed around 4.5 billion years ago, it's an old lady, or a teenager, in a cosmic context. She could be in great shape if some of her inhabitants, us humans, were not so greedy with our needs. Needs that may be necessary as well as controversial for life. We will address this later. As a reminder, the Earth orbits the Sun, not shown in this exhibition, although being essential, of course, and its axis of rotation is tilted. This is what creates what we call seasons. Note also that its trajectory is not circular, but elliptical. It's also a terrestrial planet. This word, which can be reminiscent of science fiction novels, simply means that it consists mainly of rock and metal, unlike gas planets such as Jupiter.
Here is a representation of the Moon, formed shortly after the planet which shelters us. It was supposedly born from a collision between the former and the hypothesized ancient planet Theia, according to the giant impact hypothesis. Needless to say, it was a large pebble which lost the battle. Much smaller than Earth, its size is visually almost identical to that of the Sun because it is so close, hence the eclipses, to our habitat compared to other planets. Apart from its function as a permanent natural satellite for the Earth, and its responsibility for the variation of the tides, which, in turn, undoubtedly influence those who live near the sea, the Moon has been, since the dawn of time, a muse for artists and an influence of all kinds for human cultures en masse. I have represented it here with lines that are samples of the ceaseless air traffic. Although it is very far away, it varies, but let's take 384,000 kilometers as a reference. It is still more splendid in real life. Finally, it is interesting to note that with each passing year, it moves a little farther away from the Earth. Not only that, but it's also accelerating. Could this be a celestial message?
Were things better before? Not necessarily. In any case, it depends on the people and the situation. Besides, how can we talk about a subject that we understand only through texts, images, and our imagination? One thing is certain and obvious. The world is changing, and those changes are accelerating. We have more and more machines that are becoming increasingly compact and efficient. What meets our needs also creates some dependencies and disconnection from the world which came before. I'm not sure that disconnection is a strong enough description. What's changed? Well, many things. But note here the transition from a mainly rural world to a metropolized one. This resulted in a disconnection from nature. Also, consider that we've grown from less than 1 billion or so human beings 200 years ago to almost 8 billion today. As the universe has accelerated its expansion, so have we. More humans means more opinions, if they count, and, above all, more new challenges.
We can talk about peeling away and analyzing history, but let's agree that the Industrial Revolution was a somewhat controversial idea. In the scale of human history, it is but a speck of dust, a tiny slice of space-time in the truly living world of an infinite universe which is, to put it simply, mind-boggling in scope. The Industrial Revolution began in England in the 18th century, then spread to other so-called modern countries, the very countries which still control the world more than 200 years later. Technology from that time, such as the wood stove, is obsolete or used mainly in a romantic way. Yet, before it lay the remains of animals, symbolizing the advent of man's industrialized hold over the world, over even those considered the most free, the birds. This feeling does not date from the Industrial Revolution. Humanity's lack of tenderness towards their roommates is nothing new. In fact, it has increased massively and even professionalized over that span of time. Yes, the wood stove is far behind us. But what about our relationship to animals?
Those who scrape the walls of their house to profit from the sale of the rock that constitutes it perforce secure their own loss. Bees build and feed their homes. In contrast, many people have a home built for them, then sell it for a better one thanks to the added value. Humans release gas into the air, send objects into space, and sully the Earth's crust. This vandalism, in turn, penetrates, infiltrates, and soils the Earth. I would be curious to know just how many kilometres of traces of pollution there are inside our habitat. Pollinating insects, including domestic and wild bees, are the main contributors to pollination, 80% if specialists are to be believed. Around 40% of the pollinating population in Europe has been decimated in the last 10 years. This is not due to the external effects of our activity, but to the regulations we impose on our fields, as well as hunting fishing grounds, and those natural areas freed by the cascade effect. The absurdity of monoculture as it fights alongside chemicals and pesticides on the stage of stupidity. That's not all, however. There's also little-known electromagnetic pollution and other factors that we'll study later.
Up to this point, we've seen Earth from afar. Then we jumped to the moon. We pondered the problems affecting our roommates, the animals. Now, these nice colors are my representation of a dead zone. On the right side of the image, the blue part shows a living piece of ocean, alive with various species. So then, what is a dead zone? It is an abnormally anoxic, oxygen-depleted part of the ocean. This results in the death of the local fauna by asphyxiation. Without going too deep with the figures, note that dead zones have been increasing steadily for 50 years, especially since the 90s. Such an increase would represent a total of 245,000 kilometers square, about the size of the United Kingdom. As with many other problems, this comes from fertilizers and mass farming. So let's salute monoculture, which erodes the soil that creates easy passages for all this debris to spread. Welcome to the Anthropocene era.
While the introduction gave us a vague idea of what the Anthropocene is, it's noteworthy that the term is relatively recent and has not yet been officialised. Geologists and scientists in general, as well as politicians, journalists, etc., are likely to use this term. Regardless, words will live as long as humans live. And as long as humans live, words will fight. Because humans fight. They fight with words, with hands, and with weapons, especially words and weapons. This photo, a humanoid representation, further emphasises our distance from nature. In geology, the Holocene, 11,700 years ago to present date, warmer, is the period following the Pleistocene, 2,580,000 to 11,700 years ago, colder. Anthropocene is taken from the Greek anthropos, human being, and kainos, new. Beyond definitions and words, how many of us feel a visceral need to respect nature and change the present paradigm? Am I merely under the influence of an invisible lobby that pontificates to the poor and the middle classes, the lower middle classes and middle classes, why they must maintain this need? How can I explain that ever since the age of 4 or 5, I felt this incongruity between our practices and our utilitarian, selfish, and distanced approaches to nature?
By writing for this exhibition, I realize how difficult it sometimes is to make the distinction between what is true and what is, to use today's parlance, fake news. A false, yet popular belief held even by those considered to be the most intelligent. Regardless, I am not only alarmed by this information or by what I read, but also by what I perceive intuitively and instinctively. This word instinct can have multiple meanings according to the times and cultures. From a fight-flight perspective, it is a word which can kill, certainly, but which in many cases can also save. It is on a machine that I record these ideas, and it is via a machine that I will send the files which constitute this work you're experiencing. Another machine will print it, and from a vast number of other machines, computers, phones, etc., it becomes possible that you will be able to consider and even heed these words, only if, algorithmically, the machines have decided that this might interest you. Do you follow? The strength of today's machines is not only in their power of destruction or construction, but in gathering information on a very large scale. How natural or desirable is this?
Architecture is a set of habitats created by humans for humans. From the first huts to our modern skyscrapers, what is now considered an art is constantly evolving to meet the needs of this animal with a highly developed cerebral cortex called human. An architect is a creator of plans and designs, the most distinguished of which are not exclusively for mercantile purposes, but are sketched for the well-being of human beings. This involves understanding the natural environments already present and the need for them to be respected, even as these areas are modified. It also means that we must be mindful when we create spaces which we use for our various activities. Think about this. We spend roughly 30% of our time sleeping and 70% working, resting, idling, meeting, praying, playing sports, having sex, warring, learning, mistreating or caring for animals, and so on. How can we stay close to our origins and maintain our vital relationship with nature when the majority of us live in urban spaces? You can imagine whatever you wish from this photo. I must acknowledge its origin, which I've altered a bit. That is to say, the architect Sao Fujimoto and his work Cloud.
In the past, material components were simple. For the Parthenon, it was marble found locally. It was the only material used, from the foundation to the roof. Currently, the enumeration of specific materials, whether used in a huge building or small gas station, could fill entire volumes. There are enameled metal plates, hardened steel, water pipes, metal frameworks, plumbing, sanitary facilities, frames, hardware, etc. The splendid unity of materials is a thing of the past. Raw material is no longer raw. It is itself a product of industrial transformation. Today, nobody in the building, apart from specialists, knows how steel billets are made or what their qualities are. Most of the materials are simply ordered by phone or online. Richard Neutra, Survival Through Design, 1954.
To represent something that you can't quite see is not easy. Electricity is the flow of electrons, characterized by their energy and speed. If you can't see the electricity, you can at least see its effects, for example, lightning. Light is made of photons. These are massless and carry no electromagnetic charge. When we see lightning, or any other electrical discharge, the electrons move through the air, causing it to heat up and emit photons. We can only see the photons, but lightning is actually caused by electrons moving through the air. In the chapter Changes, I mentioned the Industrial Revolution. It's during this time that mastery of the electric current became the driving force behind these massive changes. Almost 100 years after the French Revolution, Thomas Edison founded General Electric, one of the top 5 companies responsible for global air pollution. A pioneer who brought about the diffusion of electricity, among other things, Edison is also credited with the invention of the kinetograph, kinetoscope, phonograph, electric chair, and a large quantity of patents which have enabled advances in a number of fields which most of us have embraced.
While it is generally difficult to find reliable statistics, as these change almost daily, and the criteria and counting techniques vary, it is interesting to note that currently between 10 and 20% of the world's population has no access to electricity. Additionally, every day about 400,000 people are born, about the population of Brno or Florence, and 160,000 die, about the population of Sherbrooke, Canada. The increase in population and its needs, new and old, leads to an increase in our needs, which affects all sectors of industry and household consumption. It is subjectively that I represent here what I will call the lost energy. That is to say, that which we use unnecessarily. As a microscopic example, take this streetlight in a deserted street. In the future, or today, we must ask the following questions. How can we better share existing energy and increase its production while having a reduced ecological impact? And, in this specific example, which can also be applied to other kinds of energy that is lost in private and professional life, should we light a deserted street in the middle of the night? Lighting certain spaces in a city in the middle of the night creates a sense of comfort and security for the few passers-by, such as those walking down the street or even those driving.
Since the dawn of time, man has explored what was not long ago a vast, impenetrable world. The impenetrability of this world continues to diminish as the millennia and centuries progress. This diminishment began with the domestication of animals and agriculture. Then later, the creation of passageways on the earth and sea, technological advances, and finally inventions such as the numerous machines which allow us to always go further and, especially, faster. Flying machines, racing cars, and submachines, meaning submarines and subways, traverse the ground at top speed. The need for mobility is fundamental to psychological survival. Consider the hunter-gatherer or today's office worker. For the former, it concerns the search for food necessary for survival, while for the latter, who can technically work from home, this need is more complex, as are our societies. Roads mainly, sea lanes, railways, airways, and rivers. Here is an image which represents a sample of the transportation routes which are central in the life of each human being. While transport has long been the prerogative of living things and goods, there exists a new type of transportation in the 21st century, the transportation of information, thanks to that great invention, the internet.
There is no need to define what a tourist is, because in the Western world, we all are. I don't know anyone around me who hasn't taken a trip for the pleasure of discovering a place outside their usual environment. Many people use this opportunity to display their wealth by sharing photos on social networks. Traveling has become a way of showing a certain social status. I can travel, therefore I am. And yet, a few decades earlier, tourism had been the prerogative of either the elite or a person with more courage than that of his peers. Travel was, not long ago, a way for someone with a sense of adventure to get out of their comfort zone and enjoy pleasurable challenges. Nowadays, with the advent of the internet, everything is easier. According to some statistics, 1 person in 10 is employed by the tourism industry. 8% of greenhouse gas emissions are linked to tourism. It is increasing by 4% per year, and the trend with the so-called emerging countries forecasts massive increases in these figures. It is, of course, impossible to predict the future, and therefore environmental disasters, wars, epidemics, and other acts of terrorism, which will reduce these flows. If mass tourism is a great boon for a number of families who can thus live decently and have access to modernity, it is also a formidable scourge which broadens inequalities and denaturalizes people and places.
Advertising is part of an unreal world that offers us a projection of what we want to be. To be effective, it must be addressed to us, and what interests each human being the most is himself. In order to sell something, an advertisement must seduce us, thus creating our connection to the image that it conveys, and by extension, to the image we have of ourselves and which we wish to communicate to others. The raw material of an advertiser is the use and transformation or manipulation of signs, images, and symbols. This photograph represents the outrageous omnipresence of street advertising, particularly its effects on our minds and in digital devices. Since the creation of the first newspaper advertisements several centuries ago, intended for the elite, those who knew how to read, then later through pictures, and now modern advertising, the techniques used to invade available brain space have been constantly improved. This was achieved by having recourse to psychology, the study of the masses, inquiries, and various experiments on given subjects. We've become almost like laboratory rats, except that the outcome is not death.
The energy at our disposal and that which we spend on entertainment varies according to cultures, countries, social classes, and individuals. No matter the source of entertainment, reading, independent or mass films, opera, funny videos on the internet, theater, graffiti, fireworks, the Olympic Games, scrolling social media, and so on, we are drawn by an ancestral need to entertain ourselves and temporarily escape from our real concerns. The unreality offered by the spectacle is, therefore, an escape which we can qualify as necessary. The fact that you are listening to this text and that you are looking at the associated photo is a thin yet fine example. The commodification and industrialization of entertainment, however, raises a number of questions. According to Blaise Pascal, to distract is to move away from the essential. To what extent is this desirable? What have we become in the era of massive use of social media and other entertainment platforms? What are the impacts on our relationships between humans and what's going on in the background? What's truly essential?
Paradoxes exist within all of us, and if our differences are not exaggerated or destructive, they can add an exciting layer of complexity to beings that are at once simple and banal, yet also mysterious and enigmatic. Art and its definition, whether it's the opinion of a layman at the bar counter or the insights of a recognised intellectual, it fosters talk, discussion and arguments among all, or at least most of those who are lucky enough to not have to contemplate their survival. The artist can inspire you to dream, or the artist can annoy you. It depends. In any case, he creates a very real feeling of identification or rejection. There are three models which people dream of: the politician, the athlete, and the artist. They all represent access to power, but different kinds of powers. The athlete and the artist are lucky to be more adored. Beyond a simple definition, I believe that art is a remedy, a kind of medicine, whether it be physical or not. I continue to cultivate this paradox in the garden of my imagination. The definition of an artist and the idea of considering myself one annoys me to a certain extent. Yet, I continue to propose diverse projects that push me to the maximum of my ability. This approach cannot be disassociated from my need to create and to have an impact on others, therefore, to be an artist.
Whatever subject comes under the knife, tumbling into the pitfall of backward-looking, conformist, or vaguely post-rebel ideas is very easy. Art, which was formerly divided, art with a capital A, was intended for the rich, while art with a lowercase a was for commoners and often transmitted orally, has since become much more widely disseminated and therefore much more interesting. You still have to want to dig it. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, an erudite or a layman. Your device and or your library can contain classic works formerly considered reserved for the elite, who believed themselves to be more intelligent. It can also showcase popular works, even many that are not widely circulated. Right beside these classics, your shelf can contain a book on New York hip-hop from the 90s, a book on Malagasy painting, or a Kazakh film from the 60s. What I call pop-artization of the world, a nod to a movement that is already a grandfather in the art world, helps with the transmission of creation in general. From this, I invite us not to fall into a sense of ease and to intensify our research, not to be consumers, but rather curious admirers of the incredible, multifaceted creation which has been offered to us.
If this old car here represents the straitjacket, the machine, which distances man from what is essential to him, nature, the question is this: how and to what extent do we create and use, for the majority of us, machines and environments that are not antagonistic, complementary to a development that respects our fundamental origins?
Feeling the pull of the void is something we cannot resist. Our human nature is defined by antagonisms. The need to live versus the need to destroy oneself, others, the need for vitality versus great fatigue, mostly caused by external consequences and or results of our thoughts and personal actions. The need to fight versus a disinterest in all things. The drama and the beauty of our short lives lies in the fact that each decision is unique. We can radically change course, for better or worse. An a posteriori idea, but we can never go back to moment X or time Y. This is how each new decision adds layers of creative or destructive experiences. It is the Lusk Dizehan. Until the living forces fade, and finally, by fear and relief, extinguish the stardust or the cosmic defecation which an individual represents, a nothing that takes himself for a whole in a whole that is nothing, an infinite nothing.
This planet was here before us and will continue after we are gone. We cannot imagine what forms of life will follow us if we are the driving force that will destroy the animal and plant world as we know it today. We already know that a number of species have disappeared or will disappear as a result of our activities. As the nothing appropriating everything, we are responsible, and that is, I believe, the subject of this photographic presentation. I very humbly hope that it has enabled us to grasp some of the problems of our time, which are nothing less than the fruit of the legacies and developments of thousands of generations of men and women who have descended from many different backgrounds, yet share the need to exist, to survive, to transmit, and to understand, among others. These different needs include explanations of the darkest and most absurd pages in the history of mankind. They also contain the essence of the beauty of human life, which is intimately linked to the animal and plant world.